Saturday, March 16th, 2024. Just heading to the gym, because after the gym I gotta do some shopping, baby shopping, do the diaper run and all the supplies. We have a supply chain set up, for the baby, and I kind of work that in right after the gym because the metro is next to the gym and there's a food market. I'll just make sure I have my cash with me. I think they're taking cards. Yeah, I got cash in case they don't take the cards. But most of the places are taking the payment cards now. The electronic money is becoming a reality. Day by day, you're seeing very small street vendors starting to take cards here, which ensures the taxes are getting paid. And, we can, whatever little money it is, it can fund the military or fund some infrastructure, we hope. There's still corruption here in Ukraine, but I think it's gotten cut down a lot. They have to. If they want to be part of Europe and they want to be part of NATO and have all these aspirations and get proper alliances, then yeah, they have to cut down on that. But what's happening? I don't know, there's been a lot of news lately, the Russians are threatening nukes, but that's nothing new. And the thing is, they know that would be suicide. America has nukes too. They're not the only ones, and our nukes work and our nukes are closer and more effective, so. But what we're seeing now is like a soft NATO. I don't think, with Trump coming, and it still looks like he's quite strong in the polls. There was some news that Biden had turned it around a little bit off the State of the Union, but that could be, I don't know how good that is. I mean, he's got to win in the swing states. He's got to, it's basically going to be like 4 or 5 states that decide this whole election. So it's really going to depend on his ground game in those swing states and what the economy is like at the election time. And how good he can sell himself. He's definitely got more money than the Trump campaign does. But the problem is the Trump voters are going to all turn out, and their core is very hard to convince. What you're playing for are the moderates, and many of them either will sit out the election, or if they have a strong conviction, they'll vote for Trump, I think. It depends. A lot of people's lives in America really isn't directly affected by what's happening in Ukraine, to be honest. So it's really about voter turnout. You have to get all the likely Democrat voters to turn out, and then they have a chance. But now you have like a big block of people, because of this Palestine-Israel thing going on, that are kind of not enthusiastic, and that's I think what the Trump side is playing on, is the voter apathy. The Biden people stay at home and all the Trump people turn up, and the moderates will be the moderates, so yeah, it's a tough battle, but there's a lot of time. There's like what is it, November is month 11 and we're in month 3. So it's like 8 months, 7.5 months, and usually most of the things start happening in the last 2 or 3 months is when the campaigning gets heavy, and that's about as long as people's memories are too. So we have to see what happens. It's still a very close race. I wouldn't say it's a foregone conclusion, but if the election were to be held today, it looks like Trump would definitely win. I mean, the way the polls and the betting odds and everything is looking. But it really, I think, depends on the economy and people's jobs and stock market and things like this. Inflation. But, I was watching some stuff on inflation, and people, on NPR of all things, and this guy was complaining his breakfast cereal went up in price. I mean, why don't people switch from breakfast cereal to oatmeal? I mean, that's what I eat every day. We just warm up some oats. It's straight from the farm. It's like $2 you can buy like a kilo of this stuff. It's like just sold like in big bins, and you just fill up bags of it, and it's much more nutritious, much more solid food. And if you really need to have honey or nuts or like this, you don't need to buy a Honey Nut Cheerio box for $8. You can make some oatmeal and put some honey and nuts in it yourself, and believe me, $8 of oats it can last you a long time. But anyway, so yeah, I don't really buy into the inflation thing. And like the rent situation too, if your rent is high if you're looking in upscale neighborhoods in big cities, you know, but if you're going to like a second tier city or in the countryside and everything, there's still plenty of options. That's my view. I saw that in America when I was there a couple months ago. I was just like browsing the markets and everything, and if you're willing to live in an area full of black people or Latino people, you can find a pretty good deal. But if you want all white Anglo-Saxon neighbors that went to Harvard and, you know, wear Argyle sweaters and, you know, that kind of stuff, yeah, of course your rent's going to be high. You know, if you want to live next door to Princeton University, or, you know, I was actually at Princeton University visiting and everything, walking the campus. Yeah, if you want to live there, it's going to be high. But if you want to live somewhere, you know, like in a working class neighborhood with minorities, you can find some great deals. But anyway, what I want to move on to is what the Ukraine is shaping up to look like, how this war is shaping up. It looks like we're at the beginnings of a stalemate, like in Korea. You know, I don't think there will ever be an official treaty or an official ceasefire. There never was in Korea. It just kind of things kind of happened behind the scenes, I'm sure. You know, back then it was the Russians and mainly the Chinese backing the North Koreans, and they de facto unofficially agreed on, I think, the 38th or the 36th. I think it's the 38th parallel. I don't know, 36th or 38th, one of those numbers. You know, I do all this spontaneously, so you know, I don't have a script or teleprompter or anything like that, but I think that's what's forming up here. And so you're hearing Macron talking about sending troops to Ukraine. You're starting to hear like the beginnings of like a Korean type of solution, like an unofficial ceasefire. So the lines will freeze. I think they're going to restart supplies. It looks like there's this blockage in the Senate. They're finding workarounds. They found some $300 million. The Europeans are stepping up. And I have to say, that's one thing I have to give Trump credit for, is he's given the Europeans a good kick in the ass to start taking some ownership on defense. You know, they've got to. You know, this is just too close to them. And they've got to step up with the leadership. And they brought in new NATO members, Finland and Sweden. And Swedish generals, I mean, we hear all this stuff about Sweden, but actually Swedish generals have a pretty good history of leadership in the past. And I think they could lead a multinational force, not just the British and the French. You know, but I think we have now another leadership country, not one that'll just provide bodies. I mean, I don't think an Italian general or a Portuguese general can actually lead a multinational force. I don't know if they have the culture for that like they do in Sweden or England, or, you know, I mean, France even would struggle with it to some degree. But yeah, it would have to be like, so, you know, we have officers, you know, the Finnish too. The Finnish can provide us good officers for a NATO army. So it looks like that's starting to form. You know, this is like the very beginning stage of this. So I think the weapons will start getting resupplied in just what they call just enough amount, just enough to hold the lines, but not give the Ukrainians what they need to actually quote unquote win, even though they're talking about Ukraine will never be free until Crimea is returned and all the territories returned. That's really never going to happen. You know, if Scholz is holding back the Taurus missiles and, you know, they're promised 40 F-16s and getting 6. So someone in the background is doing very careful calculations, because they don't want to, you know, obviously Russia's got nuclear weapons, and, you know, yes, it's a lot of talk, but there are probably some red lines that have been discussed behind the scenes. You know, I'm pretty sure there's some negotiations going on, backroom negotiations going on, and it would be like like I said, an unofficial ceasefire. It would just stalemate somewhere. The Ukrainians would have enough rounds to just hold the line. The Russians will probably just get tired, you know, and then things will freeze up like they did in Korea, and then a wall will get built, you know, kind of a border. The border will get built. The occupied territories in Ukraine will never be truly recognized, but from a Russian perspective, they could claim a victory, and they'll have their flags up there, and they'll move their people there, and we'll just have to wait another, I don't know, just like when the Soviet Union collapsed, you know, what was it, 1989, so 1990, so 45 years. So probably we'll have to wait 45 years for, you know, Putin. I mean, you know, people are living 120 years, so he's what, in his 70s, 80s, and then, you know, we might have to wait 30, 40 years, maybe even, who knows, if he's on life support and got great doctors and all this stuff, he could go till 120. So we might have to wait until the Russian economy collapses. You know, hopefully but Russian economic collapse only counts if the wealthy people in Russia experience hardship. I mean, their economy has been collapsed, you know, for the past 300 years. And it doesn't matter to them as long as St. Petersburg and Moscow and Sochi and a few of the other cities, elites in the other cities are okay. I mean, there's a lot of countries with collapsed economies that life is moving on. So, yeah, we would probably, it's looking like that. And the French will have troops here. You know, there'll probably be some, you know, maybe the Germans will step up some troops, and it'll be like a European Korea, you know, where we have a bunch of, it wouldn't be NATO soldiers or UN soldiers on that border. These would be like bilateral agreements that Ukraine would score, kind of like the way, you know, like the analogy is like Norway is not in the EU, but they have like so many bilateral agreements with all the different European countries. They practically are in the EU. They just don't vote. You know, they don't have a seat at the table, but they are following most 80% of the EU mandates through these bilateral agreements and trade agreements. So it'd be like that. Ukraine would get unofficial NATO, like the way Norway is unofficially in the EU. They would have all these agreements with different countries for troops, and maybe they would give something back in trade. You know, or this would just be, you know, the insurance policy that Europe recognizes that they need, you know, to keep Russia from coming into Europe and keep the Russians occupied. You know, that they would have to man that border and tie up resources on it. You know, that's also part of the war game, is that even though there's no shooting, you make them divert their economy to defense versus like innovation. And then, so that's, I think, what it's looking like a limbo state. And then, I don't know, there'll be some economic development, obviously, in Ukraine to prevent a security collapse. You know, if the economic collapse, which would lead to a security situation. You know, so if, like we were talking about before, if the economy collapses here and you have all these soldiers who haven't been paid and they got a lot of guns, next thing you know, we're living in mafia land, mafia wars. And it would resemble like the post-Soviet time in the late 80s, early 90s. You know, when they were like having machine gun battles out in the street in Moscow and all that stuff. And Kiev was like kind of crazy place back then. So there would be probably some help from Europe and investment funds to stop the anarchy. So I think that's what's shaping up, and Trump is kind of the catalyst for all of this. You know, that they know that they have to find a workaround with him. They saw what he could do to the U.S. Congress. So I don't know how strong the European coalition can be. It's a bit worrisome because the Russians, you know, are probably funding a lot of the opposition parties. I mean, I know they're involved with AfD in Germany, and that's why Germany is always like, you know, Scholz is always having to tiptoe this line because his support's like a 51% support. These European leaders are not overwhelmingly popular, except like in Norway or someplace, or Sweden. I mean, they're all like Biden, you know, they're just barely hanging on, and they have to play a balancing act, you know, to stay in power and not get themselves voted out. This is the issue with democracy, is like, and like what I was saying, social media needs regulation. It needs KYC. You can't have all these like ghost accounts, you know. It's because then it's very easy for a state actor like Russia or North Korea or Iran to get in there and run a bunch of ads and, you know, create a bunch of fake news and create all this hysteria and get people to vote for their agenda. You know, you end up voting in some pro-Russian government, and, you know, and then the Russians can stalemate the funding to hold Ukraine up. So it's but this is what looks like it's coming, is some kind of like limbo thing, and then Russia will be constantly trying to disrupt the politics in Europe, to disrupt the funding, so they can start attacking again. You know, that the Germans will elect some crazy government and they'll pull their troops out of Ukraine, and, you know, and then the Russians will exploit that. It'll be just very uneasy. I'm looking at, like, it'll be a very uneasy time. There'll be like there'll definitely be some help, but will it be steady and consistent? It's going to be very much dependent on the politics of the countries contributing to this agreement. You know, to this unofficial NATO, unofficial EU, like this unofficial ceasefire. I mean, in the Korean situation, they got the guarantee from America. This was a different time. It was the 1950s. Everyone knew communism was alive and well. You know, Stalin, Lenin. You know, we just came off of World War II. And now, you know, people haven't, you know, most Americans, most Europeans haven't experienced these things. It's a very abstract concept until, I don't know. I mean, we had 9/11 in America, and, you know, but that's even like 22 years ago. You know, that's a long time ago now. So, but that's like the closest thing we had, and that wasn't really a Pearl Harbor. You know, like Pearl Harbor was still in the memory of people during the Korean War time, and so, and, you know, the Berlin Wall and what have you, and the domino theory, and we had like you know, Eisenhower as the leader, and most of the American leadership at that time had done time in the army, had been in World War II, you know, and so they understood these things. But now we have a different time. It's like a media time, digital times. So, yeah, I hope the French and the British and the Scandinavians, you know, and they can keep the Germans on side. But the Germans, it's very tricky in Germany. But the French have a lot of people, you know, and, you know, so they would pledge troops, you know, that would hold the line. You know, there wouldn't be a ceasefire, but things would just stop, and life would go on both sides, kind of like it did in Korea. And we just have to wait for a regime change in Russia, but that may never come. We've been waiting for that in Korea, and we're on the third generation of crazy there, you know. And even, it's funny, Kim Jong-un went to Swiss boarding school, and it didn't change anything, you know. He was educated in the West, you know. He's like his father, got a big movie collection, but he keeps the screws down on his people pretty hard. So he didn't, you know, step away from the power and try to put something else in there. I don't know. Like, you try to show these guys light and show them like Western ways or something, and they just learn our weaknesses, I think, and then go back home and use it against us. But yeah, this is what's shaping up, I think. I think some sort of unofficial ceasefire is shaping up, you know. And I don't know if Trump comes in, like, I guess his way of stopping the war would be stop funding Ukraine, which would be like a handover to the Russians, and then the Europeans would fill the void. It's very uncertain. It's really uncertain, but it doesn't look like Ukraine is going to get the full NATO membership. Hungary would block that, and there'd probably be some opposition in some of the other countries, because, and then Russia would threaten nukes, and EU would be like it would be like a soft EU thing. It wouldn't be official, but Ukraine would try to do everything EU style, but they wouldn't really be in the EU. So we saw how the Polish farmers and all the protests they reacted, because they would have to compete with Ukrainian agriculture, Ukrainian labor. It's the same sort of thing with NAFTA in America. I mean, in the long run, it would be good. It would increase the economy. Those Polish farmers could move on from raising grain to raising meat or something, move up the food chain. But they don't see things like that. If the grain came from Ukraine, then they could grow more expensive crops in Europe, But nobody wants to change over. They have a nice cash cow going, I guess. So that'd have to be done with some force, I guess. I'm not sure. But not overly optimistic. I don't know how Europe has had a very hard time in the past of uniting and pulling together and doing things. I mean, the EU, it's a very loose confederation. The European Parliament doesn't really have that much power. They use funding as their carrot. So if you do things their way, you get some money. But you can see Hungary doesn't care, and they still get the money. So we'll have to see. We have to see what's going to happen. But I'm at the gym now, and time to get a workout in.